When Donald Trump launched his first campaign for the presidency, he tapped into a deep reservoir of frustration and disillusionment within the American working class. For decades, manufacturing towns across the United States, especially in the Midwest and Rust Belt, had been gutted by globalization. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. Factories that once employed thousands closed their doors, moving production to countries where wages were lower, regulations were looser, and governments offered aggressive subsidies. No country benefited more from this shift than China. Beginning in the late 20th century, Beijing's reforms opened the door to foreign investment, and multinational corporations poured in. American companies discovered that China offered not just cheap labor but also an unmatched combination of infrastructure, supplier networks, and scale. From electronics to textiles, from toys to furniture, China became the beating heart of global manufacturing. Trump understood the symbolism of this loss. On the campaign trail, he spoke directly to workers who had seen their livelihoods vanish, promising to reverse the tide. "They took our jobs, they took our factories," he declared, pointing at China as the chief villain. His pledge was bold. Through tariffs and aggressive trade policies, he would force companies to abandon China and return to U.S. soil. Towns once abandoned would thrive again, and, made in America, would once more dominate store shelves. Once in office, Trump unleashed a wave of tariffs designed to punish China and other trading partners. The theory was straightforward: make Chinese goods so expensive that companies would have no choice but to relocate production. In practice, the tariffs introduced a host of new problems. American businesses that relied on Chinese components suddenly saw costs skyrocket. Some goods faced duties as high as 145%, transforming profitable products into loss-making ventures overnight. Larger companies had the ability to negotiate or absorb part of the costs, but smaller firms were left exposed. Judd King, founder of Starlix Games, captured the dilemma perfectly. His company makes glow-in-the-dark outdoor games that depend on LED components sourced in China. With tariffs, his costs ballooned. "There's no wait and see anymore," King admitted. "We're trapped. We either pay the duties or we stop selling." That sense of entrapment echoed across industries. American companies wanted stability and predictability. Instead, they got a roller coaster of tariff hikes, exemptions, and threats of further escalation. Not all firms felt the pain equally. Giants like Walmart, Target, and Home Depot had leverage. They could pressure suppliers to cut margins, spread costs across thousands of products, or adjust pricing gradually. But even they warned that prices were rising. A Barbie doll at Target, for example, surged 43% in cost within months. For smaller retailers, the story was harsher. Many operated on thin margins to begin with. With tariffs eating into profits, they faced impossible choices: raise prices and risk losing customers, or absorb losses and risk bankruptcy. Some, like At Home Group and IG Design Group, did not survive. Their bankruptcies signaled a troubling trend: a wave of smaller firms being crushed under tariff pressure. Cameron Johnson, a Shanghai-based consultant, explained, "This is survival of the fittest. Large firms might weather it, but mid and lower-end U.S. companies are being wiped out." Before Trump's second wave of tariffs, many companies had pursued a strategy known as China Plus One. The idea was simple: maintain core production in China but diversify into another country, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, or India, to hedge against risk. At first, this worked. Companies shifted portions of their supply chains to these countries, hoping to reduce dependence on China. But Trump's reciprocal tariffs blew up the strategy. Vietnam, once a prime alternative, was suddenly slapped with high duties. Cambodia and Indonesia followed. India, touted as a rising star, became less attractive after Trump imposed a 50% tariff to punish its oil purchases from Russia. The result? Companies that had invested in diversifying found themselves trapped again. They had moved to avoid tariffs, only to discover their new bases were targeted as well. "People don't want to leave China and end up in the wrong place," warned Stephen Lamar of the American Apparel and Footwear Association. Adding to the chaos were legal questions over Trump's authority to impose certain tariffs. A federal appeals court ruled that some levies, particularly those targeting transshipped goods, lacked legal grounding. That decision set the stage for a Supreme Court battle, injecting further uncertainty into business planning. Companies now faced an impossible task. Should they base strategies on tariffs that might disappear if overturned, or assume they would remain in place indefinitely? For many, the only rational choice was to delay major decisions. That paralysis became another form of cost. Kerr Gibbs of Foresight Restructuring summed it up: the tariffs are bad, but the uncertainty is worse. No one wants to make $1 billion supply chain move only to see the rules change 6 months later. At the end of the chain, the burden lands on consumers. Prices for toys, clothes, electronics, and home goods have climbed steadily. Analysts warn that the impact will be most visible during the holiday shopping season, when tariff-inflated costs will hit American wallets hardest. Joe Feldman, a retail analyst, warned that investors are underestimating the lag effect. The real pain hasn't fully arrived yet. But it's coming, and it's going to be obvious. For working families already struggling with inflation, the combination of higher prices and shrinking choices threatens to erode purchasing power. What began as a trade dispute between governments has become a daily cost for ordinary Americans. The surge in bankruptcies has been staggering. Restructuring firms report record demand as companies collapse under tariff pressure. The trend is most pronounced in mid-sized retailers, toy makers, and household goods suppliers. Each collapse sends ripples across the supply chain, affecting suppliers, distributors, and workers. The crisis has reshaped entire industries. Companies are abandoning certain product categories altogether. Starlix Games, for instance, shifted away from toys toward resin dice for tabletop games, which face less severe tariff impacts. But such pivots are survival strategies, not growth plans. As Kerr Gibbs observed, businesses are paralyzed. It's not just about tariffs today, it's about not knowing what tomorrow looks like. Despite all the turbulence, most U.S. companies remain in China. The logic is clear: the country is not only a manufacturing hub but also a vast consumer market. Leaving would mean forfeiting both production capacity and access to hundreds of millions of customers. The U.S.-China Business Council survey confirms this. 2/3 of U.S. firms plan to maintain or expand investments in China, even as they complain about tariffs and uncertainty. As Cameron Johnson put it, the fantasy of reshoring is just that, a fantasy. The U.S. doesn't have the infrastructure, labor force, or policy incentives to recreate China's manufacturing ecosystem. It's not realistic. To fully understand why Trump's tariff war has proven so disruptive, one must rewind half a century to the beginning of the modern U.S.-China relationship. In 1972, President Richard Nixon's visit to Beijing marked a turning point in world history. The United States, long estranged from China after the Communist Revolution of 1949, suddenly extended a diplomatic hand. What followed was not merely a thaw in Cold War politics but the start of an economic entanglement that would shape the 21st century. When China opened its economy under Deng Xiaoping's reforms in the late 1970s, American businesses saw opportunity. Wages were low, infrastructure was improving, and 1 billion people represented a vast untapped market. By the 1990s, as globalization accelerated, China had become a favored destination for U.S. manufacturers seeking efficiency and cost savings. The 2001 entry of China into the World Trade Organization cemented this trajectory. It granted China permanent most favored nation status, enabling it to trade more freely with the world. Factories mushroomed across the country. Ports like Shanghai and Shenzhen became the beating heart of global trade. By 2010, China had overtaken the United States as the world's largest exporter. But with growth came tension. Critics argued that China was manipulating its currency, subsidizing industries, and flooding markets with cheap goods. American workers, particularly in the Rust Belt, bore the brunt of the competition. Between 2000 and 2010, the U.S. lost nearly 6 million manufacturing jobs. Entire towns hollowed out, leaving resentment that would simmer for years. Trump, more than any other politician, harnessed that resentment. His tariffs were not just economic policy but an attempt to rewrite decades of trade orthodoxy. Yet, because the roots of U.S.-China integration run so deep, disentangling them has proven almost